The goal of this lesson is to probe how justice ideas play out in what we produce for the media or what we take from the media. Let's begin with the primary idea of fairness. We want people to treat us fairly. In response, we try to be fair to others. The loftier term justice may refer to police, courts, and prisons, but in this course I use justice or social justice as synonyms for fairness. In the first part of this lesson, I will describe some contrasting worldviews and consider how those views might affect a journalist's work. Justice and fairness ought to permeate media efforts to keep us informed. News organizations ought to tell us with impartiality about the conditions others face. The challenge I put to you is to look more carefully at the news so you can judge how the justice ideas are honored. Justice is a challenging ethical concept because people define justice in many different and conflicting ways. I call the basis for those ideas worldviews because they identify strongly held core beliefs about how the individual is related to others or how one's group is related to the world in which it operates. One person's world may seem to be a dangerous place. Another person may think his surroundings are friendly and comfortable. These different ways of understanding the world often rest on some very strong core beliefs. In this and the next two slides, you'll see three examples of those different worldviews. Some people believe that the individual and her freedom to act on her self-interest are the paramount concerns in human relations. The belief is that if we all support and enjoy maximum freedom to reach our personal goals, the society will prosper. This worldview might lead a person to work for more benefits and opportunities for herself while ignoring the needs of others. A blogger might focus on legislation or court decisions that would benefit him. An executive of a media company might promote his or the company's goals over public or audience needs. This kind of person might look at the slide image and think, "This is my pie, I want it all." Many people think that justice is based on respect and strict attention to the rules and boundaries established by law, property ownership, role definitions, and wealth. Just as nations war over disputed borders, individuals often act to defend a fence line or a place in a ticket line at all costs. Congress and state legislatures often get mired in their work because of rules written many years earlier. Violent assaults have followed a person's wandering into a gated community or private property. Rules and boundary thinking is consistent with self-interest and minimizes concern for others. The rules-bound person may expect that others will also abide by the rules and boundaries. This thinking also reflects an idea I'll discuss in a later slide, the principle of fair play. Some people act on a worldview that accepts that we have obligations to others. Our identities are built on connection and commitment to others, rather than solely on what we deem our self-interest. I've met journalists who searched out stories that disclosed injustices to the public. News accounts touch us emotionally when they describe personal sacrifices that help others. This photograph, taken in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina, reminds me of journalists I talked with then about their efforts to help others, even as they tried to report the devastation. No matter how we proclaim our belief in one of these ways of thinking, circumstances often force us to honor the alternative belief. And some of us just move back and forth among the ideals. A person may be very generous in donations to charities, altruistic, yet call the police if someone steps uninvited on his property. That person has mixed his belief in the necessity of rules and boundaries with his willingness to meet obligations to others, to show care and respect for them. A public relations consultant may devote most of her time to projects that earn profits, yet take on other causes for free. News coverage of political arguments may reveal one advocate speaking from a rule perspective, while the opponent reveals a mindset focused on the needs of people. So if there are so many differences in how people define justice or fairness, How can we construct a way to apply justice ideas to media work or to media content? The answer resides in some time-honored principles of fairness that we will describe in the next slides. The principle of fair play assumes that we accept our place in a collaborative community and participate voluntarily or formally in its actions. The participation yields benefits that are shared widely. If a city's traffic control system of lights, stop signs, crosswalks, and police enforcement benefits all with increased safety, those benefits should inspire citizens to obey the traffic laws. This example illustrates a paradox in the fair play idea. The obligation to obey the rules is often subverted by our strong belief in personal freedom and self-interest. People I know readily assert their support for the principle of fair play until I ask if they have recently run a red light or failed to stop at a stop sign. John Rawls, the late Harvard philosopher, tried to craft a specific way to advance the goal of social justice. He invoked an idea advanced by many philosophers. A social contract exists between the individual and his society and is continuously being renegotiated. Rawls envisioned a negotiation in which all citizens are free and equal and striving for a community with the greatest possible degree of justice. The negotiators, he argued, must be denied the ability to argue from social standing, wealth or position, self-interest, and must forego debating tricks such as threats, filibusters, and evasion. The disadvantaged citizen, negotiating from what Rawls called his original position, would face the powerful public official. That official, though, must also argue from the original position. The negotiation should proceed behind a veil of ignorance. Imagine decisions about justice being talked out by negotiators who are not allowed to know or use details of the race, gender, age, ethnicity, or social standing of the other participants or of the people they represent. Thus, blinded, the negotiators would strive for outcomes that benefit all parties. If exceptions are negotiated, they must benefit the weakest of the parties. The reality is that social justice is rarely, if ever, achieved behind a veil of ignorance. Imagine members of Congress agreeing to consider legislation behind the veil. The test requires setting aside the parts of our identities that foster difference and distinguish us from others: money, parents, skin color, education, title, property. Yet Rawls' thinking offers a model for journalistic work. We can find an example in any metropolitan area. Let's take Seattle. One of the hundreds of immigrant communities approaches a newspaper, television station, or public radio station and argues that it is ignored by the media and asks for fairer coverage. The editor accepts that he must ignore the power he has to include or exclude any group from coverage. He and the immigrant spokesperson agree they both value fair news coverage and both oppose inequality. The outcome will be increased attention to immigrant communities. As he leaves the amiable conversation, the immigrant representative asks if celebrity coverage will decrease as a result. No, replies the editor, who realizes that an exception has been made that doesn't help the weakest parties. He smiles. He still has all the power of a media gatekeeper. We usually distribute benefits to members of a group according to the principle of distributive justice, which I'll explain in a moment. Our willingness to reward people unevenly is often criticized as a departure from the moral position of formal justice. Let's look at how these two ideas differ and how they might be applied in news coverage. The principle of formal justice is easily stated but not easily honored. If two employees have achieved the same level of productivity in a year, the principle says they should receive the same benefit without exception, whether it is a merit raise, a promotion, a pat on the back, or a company car. Like cases should be treated alike with no exceptions and no double standard. We rarely see formal justice applied because other interests get in the way. The result is that managers often try to achieve fairness on the basis of distributive justice. Distributive justice is formal justice with a huge loophole. There can be exceptions to the rule of treating like cases alike. The ethical requirement is that exceptions be based on differences that would generally be approved as morally justified. Giving war veterans extra benefits in hiring or salary would be deemed a moral justification by many. Awarding scholarships on the basis of need rather than academic record would be applauded by some, while others would argue that formal justice should be observed. If news media followed formal justice, newspapers and television news would sound and look quite different. An ethically weak form of distributive justice guides the makeup of media content, as some topics and people are elevated to the top of the hour or to the front page on the basis of interest and not necessarily because of a morally justified distinction. Compensatory justice refers to the application of distributive justice to situations in which past inequalities are recognized. Age, skin color, race and ethnicity, nationality, gender, beliefs, disabilities, and circumstances of where we were born or lived are among the factors that deny some people the benefits of society. The principle supports the idea of giving benefits related directly to the deprivation. The Alabama syphilis case that Ruggiero described on pages 105 and 106 is an example of a harmful government-sponsored medical experiment imposed on ill-informed patients. The president's apology scarcely reached the level of compensatory justice for a sadistic, cruel experiment. National efforts to provide compensatory justice often run into strong opposition. The past is a territory that sharply divides people when the question of compensation comes up. However, compensatory justice can easily be applied in news coverage. When coverage has systematically ignored certain groups, ideas, or individuals, smart managers should recognize the failures and pump up attention to the neglected groups. Retributive justice usually applies to the work of police, prosecutors, courts, prisons, and other agents of law enforcement. I mention it here because the media do sometimes work in the realm of retributive justice. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution's pursuit of the handcuffed man in Lesson 2 was an example of a news organization stepping into crime investigation because city police failed to act. The media have no legal authority in law enforcement, except a general right that all citizens share to monitor police conduct. But aggressive journalists can force police or prosecutors to pay attention to wrongdoing. When journalists cross that line and become crime investigators, a different kind of journalism emerges, often with impressive results. But media have also damaged the value of justice by deciding a defendant was guilty long before a trial, by interfering with police work, and by releasing details of a pending investigation.